This is the third part of my little series on wills. If you saw the first one, you'll know that was about men and wills. The second was women and wills. But there's another part of this whole area of family history that I think gets a little bit overlooked. The whole point of this video is to redress the balance. Today I'm calling on the assistance of my 8 times great-grandfather, John Worsley, who lived in Parr in Lancashire, and very shortly before he died, he did in fact leave a will. What is called a non-cooperative will, which is basically a really informal, sketchy kind of last will and testament. Most wills that are properly written start with a description of the person making them, name, address, status, occupation, all the useful bits like that. John's non-cooperative will actually is a bit more urgent. It starts with a direction, and the style of writing definitely suggests to me that it was dictated, because he starts off with no other preamble by saying that his real estate should go to his son John Jr., but only later do you work out that this particular estate that he's talking about was in fact in Loughton near Parr. To quote from the document itself, "Memo, it is my mind that my real estate shall be settled upon my son John and his assigns, paying his mother £10 per annum if she keep herself unmarried, and the one end of Loughton House, but if she marry, to have but £5 ye annum, and to go off the estate." So now we know that John Sr. is married. Notice he didn't name his wife there. But we know that she's got this annuity of £10 a year. She's got the right to live in one end of the house, one part, one section, but only as long as she doesn't remarry. Which might sound a little bit mean, but there is a logic behind it. Had she remarried, she would have almost certainly moved into her new husband's house, so she wouldn't need her late husband's house at all. The document also names John Worsley's 4 children. John, who's implied to be the eldest, inherits the house at Loughton. Then there's James, Abel and Sarah, who have an equal claim to another property at Oldham, near Manchester. All of them seem to be under the age of 21. Baptism records suggest that John Jr. was maybe 18 or so possibly his father could have been in his late 30s, early 40s. No wonder this man hadn't made a will. John Worsley Sr. was not expecting to die so soon. Other than that sketchy bit of family information, John Worsley's will doesn't tell us a great deal about him. We don't know his occupation or status. There isn't a date on that document. But we do know that it was witnessed by 5 men: Edward Eccleston, Richard Booth, Peter Byram, James Holm and John Pencathman. Presumably these are friends or acquaintances of an equal social rank. They are important enough to have witnessed his will at least. And following this, probate is granted to Margaret, John's widow, so now we know finally what his wife is called, because he never tells us that in the will. And probate is granted on the 15th of June 1682. Our best guess is that he died before then. If I had to deduce anything from this document, I would say that John died fairly suddenly and fairly unexpectedly. He really wasn't planning to die when he did. And because of this, he hadn't really made any formal plans. So 4 judificent neighbours, Edward Eccleston, Richard Booth, maybe that's the Richard Booth who witnessed the will, William Gerard and Jonathan Sumner, were tasked with making a formal inventory of John's goods because they needed to work out the value of his estate. It was calculated at £233, 13 shillings and 2 pence in 1682. In modern terms, that's around about £37,400. And what is great about this inventory is Although his will tells us next to nothing, it is the inventory made relating to the property John Worsley left that tells us so much more about his life, and that is why it's really, really fascinating. So let's look into it. Some inventories are thrown together, not in any particular order. What is wonderful about others, and John Worsley's falls into exactly this category, is that they were written in an order. It's almost as though, in his case, somebody had begun outside his house and worked their way inside, room by room. 10 kine, £21. 6-year-old stirks, £3. 3 horses and a 2-year-old colt, £20. 3 swine, £1.12. 3 sucking calves, 10 shillings. In addition to this, there are £15, 17 shillings and 9pence worth of hay and corn in the barn. That's about £2,500 today. You can buy a bale of hay for as little as £3 in 2020. Imagine how much hay and corn he must have had. There's various carts, wheels, harrows, ploughs, plough irons, and even 5 shillings worth of broken timber. So 19 cattle, 5 horses, 3 pigs. I reckon he was a yeoman farmer. And the inventory then goes on to talk about other things, suggesting that they moved indoors and they started in the hall. There is a cupboard, 2 chairs, some stools, a cloth, and a livery table. Some kind of side table, apparently, often used for food and drink. So, to me, it makes perfect sense that any and all of that would be in the hall. What is less clear, however, is why there is also a bedstead, bedding, and the associated furniture also in the hall. Who was sleeping in the entrance hall? So let us make our way to the kitchen. Here we find 3 sealed stools worth 4 shillings, 5 bark chairs, pewter to the value of £2, and something called treenware, which I thought sounded like it should be metal or pottery. I was thinking Staffordshire ware, Wedgwood, that kind of ware. But research suggests that treenware is probably wooden. It literally means it's made from a tree. So it could be anything. It could be bowls, boxes, plates, serving dishes, butter pats, cups, barrels, anything of that kind. But did John have anything to eat in his kitchen? Yes, some cheese. To be precise, £6 worth of cheese. That's money, not weight. Which seems like a lot of cheese to me, because it was worth 3 times as much as all the pewter that John kept in that kitchen. That's a lot of cheese. 2 other notes tell us that there was a passage in or near the kitchen. There was a buttery chamber close by. This is not necessarily where you keep butter. A buttery is a storeroom for food and generally also alcoholic drink, which is probably why in much larger households, stately homes, the most senior male servant, the head of the household, the downstairs household, came to be known as the butler, because he had the most important jobs. He directs the serving of meals, he receives guests, he looks after the wines and the spirits in the cellar. It's a position of trust. So we can also guess that John probably kept a stock of alcohol in his house. And once again, we find there is a pair of bedstocks and bedding belonging to it in the buttery. There's another similar lot in the passage. Why is the bedding scattered all around the house? I do not understand. Unless they had a more logical purpose. Has somebody put a bed in the buttery because they're thinking that somebody might pop in for a sneaky drink late at night and maybe get a bit carried away and end up so absolutely incapable that they just couldn't get themselves to bed. It really makes you wonder. I'll take it for granted that there was a fireplace or an oven in the kitchen, but one really obvious thing is missing. Unless somebody's moved it, John Worsley does not appear to have had a kitchen table. So how on earth did he prepare food? Is this perhaps somehow just linked to the idea of the bed being in the hall and another bed being in the passage? Were they just moving things around prior to the various family members going on their own separate ways after the funeral? Is that why the inventory was made? Is that why everything is in what seems to be utter disarray? I wonder. Now, this inventory is a wonderful document. It's quite systematic. It goes through the house room by room by room. But what it doesn't make any mention of is any bedrooms. There is no hint, in fact, that there is an upper floor in this house at Parr. Is it all built at ground level? Or is there a room upstairs? Nobody knows. From this inventory, we cannot say whether John and his wife, Margaret, had separate rooms. We don't know whether they shared a bed. We don't even know whether actually they and all of their children slept in the same room, which was entirely usual certainly in medieval households, and I think as far through as the Tudor period. Were they all together at night, or did they have their own rooms that they went to? It's a mystery. The eldest child that we've got a verified baptism for is John Jr., who was about 18. But I don't actually know when John and Margaret Worsley married, so it's possible that actually the daughter Sarah was the eldest and still unmarried. She'd have been 20 or so. You'd expect her to have her own room, especially if she seems to have been the only girl. So the last physical room that is mentioned is the parlour chamber, an entertaining room. And here there are also some more very weird things to be found. There are also references to goods that aren't even in this house. The last segment of this inventory is a free-for-all. Everything his nominated neighbours had forgotten to write down has been lumped in here. So I thought I'll pull out some of the interesting bits. We've got a table, a bark chair, a little table, linen to the value of £3. That's about £320 today. £2 worth of brass, 3 grates and other ironware. £9 7 in bonds, so that sounds like John has invested some money. That sum in 2020 is the equivalent of about £1,500, so he's got a decent bit of savings there. There are also £2 17 and 2 in books and debts. Now that's a combination I wouldn't put together. Books and debts. There is 5 shillings of swine's grease, pig's fat, so lard perhaps, which would be useful for frying things, particularly because there is also £1.10's worth of beef and bacon, so he could have a fry up in the morning. And as for John's clothes, well, we don't know exactly what was in his wardrobe, but we do know that his clothes were worth £5. That's about £800 today. And when we think of the contents of a typical modern wardrobe, including our shoes, that does sound really quite modest. But I think what we have to remember is that in 1682, people generally didn't have anywhere near as many clothes as we do today. Of course they didn't. You think of the practicalities of making them, washing them. They're just not going to have... You don't just put things in the washing machine and walk away. You've got to physically wash them, scrub them, dry them, maybe mend them. So maybe John had 5 or 6 shirts, a couple of nightshirts, a few pairs of stockings or hose, some shoes, boots, a hat and coat. Those long 1680s style coats that you may see in portraits are called a justacorps, or a justacorps, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. A doublet, possibly some sort of dressing gown for warmth, maybe? These garments almost certainly would have been made from natural fibres, linen, leather, almost definitely wool. Everybody seemed to have something made of wool back then. Hand woven, hand stitched, essentially made to measure. These are bespoke clothes. His outerwear, especially coats and the more formal attire, might have been made by a tailor. Often women and girls considered it a female duty to make and repair their husbands, fathers, brothers' shirts in particular. Even Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, is said to have made and mended his shirts, and she tried to carry on doing this even when he wanted to separate, which apparently greatly upset him. So keen was she to do her wifely duties because she thought she was married to him for life. And of course, wives and daughters are not actually paid anything for that. It is simply another household task, because everybody had something to do in your typical late 17th century house. Other people have made far better videos that go into greater depth about these aspects of fashion history. But what I will say is that when you imagine how time consuming it would have been to make those clothes, you've got to create the yarn, you've got to spin the yarn, you've got to weave it, you've got to measure it, cut it, sew it, possibly embellish it with whatever was in fashion at the time. You've got to go from carding the wool to weaving, dyeing, cutting, sewing, and then you realise that the things that are in John's wardrobe represent just 0.6 of the value of his entire personal estate. It really does give you a sense of just how comfortable we would consider his life to be today. And what is amazing about this, everything in this video I suppose, is that the whole reason I'm able to tell you so much about what I deduce about my ancestor's lifestyle is because he didn't have a chance to make a proper formal will before he died, and so his friends and his neighbours had to make this inventory. Inventories, I do think, are something that get overlooked when we're researching, but if you can find one, and they are often tucked away in probate papers and alongside wills, in whether they are online or whether they are stowed away somewhere in a local, regional, national archive. If you can find an inventory and you're interested in the day-to-day details of how your ancestor might have lived, I advise you to explore that inventory if you find it, because they might not be a diary as such, but they will give you a fantastic impression of the kind of objects that that person and their family would have used every day, what they did at night, how they might have sat down even in their living room, drawing room, where they kept their food, where they kept their clothes, and what sort of clothes they had. You will find anything in an inventory, and that is the brilliant thing about it. From a social history point of view, they are amazing documents.